RuneScape 3 melee weapon tier list. The reason why I'm doing this is I've seen a lot of other games have these tier lists, and as a new player for those games, it's gave me a very good direction of like kind of what weapons exist and what weapons to go for. So my goal out of this is to essentially make that. So I've got about 50 to 60 weapons here. I'm just going to go through and rank from F to S, F being trash, and S typically being best in slot. But let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to start off with is just straight up all the weapons from tier 1 to 50. All the metal weapons are pretty straightforward. Technically best in slot till you get about 50 to 60, and then it becomes a little bit more complicated and you have a little bit more choices. So maces are typically or always the best main hand weapon to use. This is because they provide a prayer bonus while dealing the exact same damage as like a scimitar. And then 2H weapons like spears, 2Hs in general, and halberts are better for AoE, but most people around this point won't have any halberts, so you're just sticking with the 2H. But yeah, all the metal weapons, so this would be bronze, iron, etc., all the way up to rune. I'm just going to slap in D tier here. They're trash compared to the rest of the items in this list, but they're actually best in slot at that point, so. The next I want to cover is probably dragon weapons. I'll just go ahead and do that. So I'm going to rank dragon claws. I'm going to do B, now I'm going to drop down to C tier. They're good for specs, but tier 60 weapons, so not too good. Next is dragon longsword. This is actually B tier. So the reason why this is B tier is even in a high level situation, the spec is really good, and this isn't something that has to be slapped in the essence of finality to be good. It's just really, really good. And then I'm gonna do Dragon Mace, worse than Dragon Claws. Dragon Scimitar is actually D tier. There's never a situation where I would ever use a Dragon Scimitar anymore. So that's D tier. Or Dragon 2H is also up there in B tier, and the reason why is it has a crazy spec. So I'm not considering these weapons inside of an essence finality, just the base weapon, using it. And the Dragon 2H actually is really, 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 really good. It has a credible spec, so if you're training early game or doing some Slayer task with a lot of mobs, I would use this over some other at tier 70 in some instances. This can be better just because the spec is like amazing. So those two. I also want to get into this. So what this is the superior version of the Dragon Scimitar. That is actually going straight to D tier. Actually, I think that's going to be the first F tier. I never see a situation where someone will ever actually use this weapon. Hey, yeah, so that guy's an idiot. Technically, you can make a superior dragon longsword, and that dragon longsword still has a special attack. I didn't realize that. I thought it was excluded. Like the Dragon 2H, you can't do that. But yeah, technically there's a superior dragon longsword, and because the longsword doesn't need to be augmented to be useful, because you don't main hand it, or like you don't only use it for damage, technically it has a use, and technically it'd be better than the normal dragon longsword, but yeah, aside from that, it's unaugmentable, so it's pretty trash compared to other tier 70s, that's all. Because once you get to tier 70, you should be using equipment that is augmentable, such as a whip. So I'm also going to put whip in C tier. It's really, really cheap augmentable weapon, but at this point, you're typically looking to use a two-handed weapon because offhands are a real pain in the ass to augment, and two-handers a level up faster. I'm going to slap that in C tier, and then I'll do the Abyssal Vine Whip as well. I think both of those are C tier. They're both augmentable, so it's got that going for it. And they're both relatively cheap. So the next weapon is going to be the Annihilation. So this is a fairly high tier. I believe it sits at tier 87 2H weapon. Some pros of it, super cheap, pretty high level, and it is augmentable. Cons of it is it's Not scythe range, so it doesn't hit extra squares around you, but it is super cheap and it's tier 87, I believe, so it's pretty good. So the next one I want to slap on is, I believe this is the base Crystal Halberd, and this is the tier 80 attuned Crystal Halberd. So I'm going to exclude the other crystal weapons because they're not so relevant, but if you're doing it, Crystal Halberd is actually really, really, really good. I would use this over a whip any day of the week because I enjoy the extra range, and it is augmentable as well. And then the Toon version, which is technically tier 80 plus extra damage based on your agility level, it's also super good. And it's also augmentable, and it's super cheap. You can essentially get one for free. I'm probably going to put that over the Annihilation. Honestly, I think Crystal Halberd's really, really good for around B tier. Okay, one of these is a tuned Bane weapon, and the other one is a base Bane +5 or +4 weapon. So the Bane +4 is pretty trash. I'm gonna put it in D tier. The reason why it's unaugmentable at this level, you probably have better options, but it is okay. It might fill a niche. The Bane ones are really, 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 really good. I'm actually going to slap this as A tier. The reason why it's augmentable, and there's actually several locations where this is a best in slot weapon, and it's super, super cheap. Say you're early on and you get one of these bad boys. You can do an Abyssal Bane, 2H, which is really, really good for leveling up Invention. It's super cheap. You're using essentially best in slot melee weapon for killing Abyssal Demons. If you get a Dragon Bane version of this, then go kill Frost Dragons, or any dragons that regard. It's essentially arguable for best in slot. So in terms of price range, I think it sits around 2 to 3 mil. It's just a fantastic option. Next is the offhand enhanced Excalibur. I'm gonna slap this in A tier as well. Main reason is every high level player will always have one of these, even if it's not equipped. It's in their inventory because it has an active effect. But it's actually a really, really, really good offhand weapon, like mid-tier if you're using like a whip or something. Because the problem with the tier 70 range is you really don't have good offhand augmentable options, which is why main hand weapons are so bad around this range, because you don't have an augmentable offhand really, except if you have the enhanced Excalibur. But I'm slapping that in A tier, just amazing weapon. It's again free. It takes some time to get the requirements to unlock, but once you unlock it, it's something you always include in your preset. All right, next are I'm gonna just do the Godswords. So let's start off with the Bando's Godswords. So I'm gonna slap this in B tier. Its special attack's actually fairly useful outside of AOF. Just using normally, it's augmentable. It's just a good, solid 2H weapon for leveling up early. Saradomin Godsword. This, I think, to this day, is still really slept on. Its special attack heals you for a crapload. It just heals so much. So if you're mid-tier, you can sustain almost anywhere with this, actually. I think this is a really disgustingly good weapon that's really slept on until you get Soul Split, and then it becomes less relevant. But mid-game, before you have Soul Split or some way of healing consistently, I think this is really, 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 really good weapon. All right, I'm gonna go off a little bit. So this is a Zeros Godsword, which is technically tier 92. I'm debating about putting this in S tier because its special attack's super relevant, but I'm gonna slap it in A tier. It's tier 92, which is phenomenal, but it's not actually best in slot for using as a main hand weapon, like, ever. But it's not bad either. But it has a really, really good special attack, which acts as kind of like a mini Berserk. But yeah, so slapping that in A tier. Next is the Zamrock Godsword. I'm instantly just going to throw this in probably F tier. I could never see a situation where you'd ever use this weapon. I guess it is augmentable, and its components are kind of good. So maybe I'll slap that at D tier. It's definitely quite a bit, like, you would never use this as a weapon really, because these two other options exist, and they're just better. They're exact same tier, but these actually have a useful spec that's kind of... I might actually drop down the BGS, because now I think about it, if you're using this weapon, you probably don't need to drop the defense too much. Next on the list, Armadillo Godsword, slapping this up with the Bando's Godsword. Not as useful, kind of fun, super nostalgic weapon, so slapping that up there. And then the the SS sword, it's a 2H augmentable weapon. I would actually use this over the whip any day of the week. I think it's worse than the halberd though. But this is a really good, fantastic starting weapon to start augmenting and using invention with. Next is probably going to be the first S tier weapon, and that is the Abyssal Scourge. The reason why is it's tier 92, augmentable of course, and has a special effect that's best in slot, where it increases your bleeds. So any melee utilizing bleeds, this is going to be your best in slot melee weapon. The next weapon on the list is going to be from Godswords Dungeon 2, which is going to be the Blade of Nymora, and I'm also going to include the offhand variant of it. Again, I think this is a pretty solid choice. It's augmentable, it's super cheap, and it's tier 90 tier 90 accuracy at tier 80 damage. So that has some use cases. Accuracy is typically valued higher than damage, except when you already have 100% accuracy, then you always want damage. So that I'm just gonna slap in here, probably somewhere in that range. I could argue for these. Next would be the Blisterwood Pole Arm. So I'm gonna slap this in C tier. It's not augmentable, but it is technically best in slot at Vire Watches. So, no, there's another weapon. I think it's okay. It's second to the best option. But now thinking about that, the actual best weapon is the Sun Spear, which is tier 78, and it's augmentable, and it's best in slot somewhere. So that is the Sun Spear here. Yeah, I think the Sun Spear is definitely B tier. I actually might put it... Ah, man, that's hard. I think it's really good though. It's not the best damage, but cheapness, and it really has a key functionality, which is killing Vires with it and disassembling it and just buying another one. So fantastic for Iron Man specifically. The next is going to be kind of nostalgic. So I'm going to go with the chaotic weapons in general. So this is like the old chaotic. So this is going to be chaotic longsword, chaotic rapier, and the chaotic maul. It's augmentable. They're okay. They do take a little bit longer to get than some other weapons on this list, but they are a solid option. And then I'm also going to do the Zamrock Spear, or not the Zamrock Spear, the Chaotic Spear. The reason why this is ranked slightly higher is because it's actually just more useful. It does the exact same thing as the Maul, except you can kill Corp with this. So it has that extra niche use, which makes it tier above. And then the best chaotic of all is the Chaotic Claw, solely because it looks good. Technically it has the exact same damage as the rest, in less use cases, but man, does the Chaotic Claw look good. So I'm putting it higher than the rest because it's my favorite chaotic. The next are, I guess I'm going to skip these two for right now, but I will do the Darok weapon. I think this is also up there. So this is going to be all Barrow's melee weapons. So there's quite a few. I'll do the Varrock Flail's technically the best one between all of them, if you're not including the effect. Just because it has a prayer bonus and exact same damage. So, and it's augmentable. So I'll put those in that list. And it's 2H, so I think it's better than these two. Just due to the fact it's 2H and that's more valuable at that level. I did want to slap this in here, the Granite Maul. It's actually best in slot for a few levels, so I'm gonna slap that probably up here. Oh, Graphite Weapon as well. This is a dungeoneering item. I actually think this is F tier. You should never ever use this except if you're free to play. It costs dungeoneering tokens to get, and you're not gonna get a whole lot of use out of it, so never ever actually get this. Alright, I did miss one of the Godswords Dungeon 1 weapons, which is the Zamrock Spear. So I'm just going to slap that in the same tier as the Zamrock Godsword. Typically it's cheaper than the Zamrock Godsword and does the exact same thing. The next one, I have the Obby Maul, so I'm not going to try and pronounce the actual name of this item, but this is also F tier. It never has a use. It's tier 60 and technically can do more damage with Berserker Necklace, but I would just always use, I would use a dragon weapon over it. It's just better. No special attack, no other real benefits for it, so. Next is, let's do the Orichalcum +2 hammer. The Orichalcum Warhammer is pretty good because it's one of the points where you can probably start investing into upgrading your weapons because you're going to be using them a little bit. When I say upgrading them, there's Orichalcum Hammer base, and then there's plus number. I think Orichalcum goes up to +2 or +3. It just increases it by a single level. I actually think this is pretty good. Yeah, so I'm just going to slap that in here. It's better than the dragon weapons. Like, it's better to use an Orichalcum 3 weapon than it is to use a Scimitar. It's just going to be higher tier. The next is, let's just do the Karis. So the Karis is a pretty unique weapon. It's actually best in slot at Calfight King after you have achievement diaries, but aside from that, it's a completely useless weapon. But it has a best in slot location, so I'm going to slap that S tier, as it only has one singular use, or just killing Calfights in general is its only use in the game. Here's a fun one, the Second Age Sword. So this weapon is, I believe, tier 78, and it looks cool, but it's absolutely trash. I don't even think it's augmentable. Oh, I am mistaken. It is technically augmentable, and it's tier 80. So it's up here with these weapons, except it costs 200 mil. So it's in the same tier, but it costs so much money. It's better just to literally buy anything else. With this money, you could technically buy the Scourge, so there's not very much use of this. Let's do the Dragon Rider 2H. This is top tier. It's arguably better than the Annihilation in a few locations. It has scythe range, so it's better than the halberd as well. I kind of tempted to put it in A tier because it's got scythe range and it's higher tier than the halberd. Yeah, I'm gonna put it above the augmented Bane attuned weapons that are augmentable. I think it's a really, really, really solid item. And there's very little content you actually can't do in the game with this, to be honest. Let's do the Elder Rune +5 2H sword. This is actually really solid, super cheap, but it's not augmentable. But it's super Iron Man friendly. I'm actually gonna slap this below. I'd probably use the chaotic. I don't know. It's probably if you don't have invention unlocked, it's better than chaotics. It's probably better than that. It's probably better than that. But if you do have invention, it kind of drops quite a bit. But I think it's really solid. I would not ever use this over Dragon Rider 2H though, so I'm gonna slap that there. Next is Lenza's Warhammer. This is a tier 80 augmentable weapon. Pretty straightforward. I'm just gonna slap that here, next to Chaotix. Let's do the Ripper main-handed offhand. So I actually would take this over the Blades of Namora anytime. They just look cooler. I think depending on what you're doing, they're typically more DPS, but it does kind of depend. They're on the same tier. They're harder for Iron Man to get, but I think they're way cooler. So they're a pretty solid option as well. They're about the same though. Next is going to be the Lava Whip. The Lava Whip is tier 85, but it's typically a lot more expensive than the other options. So that's that. This is a really, really good one. I think this might be another S tier, honestly. The Lenza's Spear. So if the monster's not poisonable, this instantly becomes like an A tier weapon. But with monsters that are poisonable, it's typically best in slot in almost every situation. So that's getting slapped in S tier. Anything that is poisonable and you already have really good accuracy it's amazing. High level PVM, it's got a lot of niche uses, so I'm putting that in S tier, though I could argue that it just goes to A tier. I'll leave it there for right now. The next will be Necromium Axe +4. So I'm also going to slap this probably around here. Next, we'll do Vestas and Stadius. So what we have here is the base Stadius Hammer, which is really, really good, amazing special attack, tier 78, but it has a special attack. It is super expensive, though. So I'm going to slap it here, and then there is a superior version, which you should always use instead of that one. And I'm going to slap that probably top B tier. Actually, I'm going to slap it in A tier, because it's best in slot for its use case. The Vesta Longsword, the tier 78 version, I'm just going to slap that. Let's do C tier. And then the superior version, I'm going to slap somewhere in the high B tier. All right, let's do these. So these are the Glacier weapons now. They look essentially identical because they are. This one is the tier 85 weapon, and this is the tier 95 weapon. So let's start with the tier 85. So technically it's tier 88 damage with tier 85 accuracy, but I believe it has an 85 attack requirement to wield. So I actually think these are amazing. I actually think they're A tier. The reason why is it allows you to use probably top of A tier. They allow you to use 2H weapon abilities such as Quake and Hurricane. They're really, really good. They always remind me of like Bionicle weapons from back in the day. But yeah, for the big upgraded Bionicle weapon, that is by far S tier. So these are tier 95 weapons, and they have the exact same ability as the previous version, but they also increase your max hit cap with its special attack, which high level is super useful. These are really, really expensive weapons, but they technically are best in slot, so I'm going to slap those in S tier because it's the best weapon in game for melee. Next, let's get into Drygores. So, Drygores I'm also going to slap in A tier. Actually, man, it feels bad, but I actually think I want to, let's just slap them in A tier. So, both of them, so Drygore Mace is always better in every situation, essentially, than the other two. So, this longsword icon actually represents the longsword and the rapier. You could argue weaknesses, but the mace gives prayer bonus, and the others do not, and it's a pretty significant prayer bonus. So, all right, I did miss another Vesta item, so let's do the Vesta Spear and the Superior Vesta Spear. I'm gonna slap that up there. So the Vesta Spear, tier 78, augmentable, does degrade though. It's not too bad. The Superior one is really, really good, super cheap, and it can be used for Corporal Beast. So it just has more use cases than the VLS. Alright, let's do the Tetsu weapons. So these are from ports. They have really high requirements to unlock and take a lot of time, but they're essentially free. So the tier 78 version, yeah, I might put it up a little bit. Let's put it at the bottom of B tier. Nah, let's put it in C tier. It's the same as Vesta. But the tier 88 ones, those are like really, really, really good. Not really good, but like I'd put them next to like Drygores and stuff. They do take time to get, but they're free, and they essentially do the exact same damage as Drygores do. The next is the Missouri's Spear. This is tier 85 augmentable spear. So it's right around this range. Vesta Longsword or Vesta Spear is better. The Masuta's War Spear's next. So this is tier 82 Halbert that's augmentable. So it's better than the Crystal Sword or Crystal Halbert, very, very comparable. And you can buy it for the Grand Exchange. Has no requirements outside of, like, no quest requirements like the Crystal or Toon Crystal Halbert would. Next is the Pterosaur Maul. So this could be argued in the S tier as an A tier. I actually think it's an A tier. So if you don't know what this does, is essentially acts as a tier 80 weapon if it's not used against a ranged monster who has a weakness to melee. So if it's used against something that's essentially super effective against, it's S tier. But I find even when it is S tier, it has very niche uses, it feels like. But technically it's best in slot at a few locations, but the Zuck sword. This is from it's RuneScape's 3's Inferno, and it's tier 95 2H weapon. So that's best in slot. The problem with this though is the glacial weapon's always used to main hand, and this is used more for bleed builds, like combination with Scourge. It's kind of slap too, and then you spec with it and you switch back, but it's still really, really good to main hand because it's tier 95. So I'm going to slap that up there as well. Next, let's do the Kopashes. So we have the Kopash of Caridian, which is a tier 82 weapon. It is augmentable. I'm going to slap it right around. It's technically better in Chaotix than Statius Hammer, so I'll put it there. And Kopash of the Turidian, I think is how it's pronounced, and it's offhand. These are tier 92 weapons, so better than Drygors. Technically better than the Glacior weapons, except they don't have a special attack, so I actually think, man, that's rough. They're technically better if you're not using the spec, but if you're using the spec, the Glacior ones are just better. I'll slap it here. Next is the Crossy. This is a very OG weapon, but it's augmentable. And it's tier 78, so I'm gonna slap it here in front of the whips just because it has requirements. It's technically free, but it has a load more requirements than the Vesta weapons do. I'll slap it up here because it's really not that bad, and you can get an offhand variant. So okay, the Noxious Scythe. So this might piss off some people, but I'm putting this as S tier over them all. It's the best halberd in game when you can't use the Lanica's spear. So when you need more accuracy and when it's not poisonable, it's the best halberd range weapon in the game. It's a great weapon all around. You can do every single piece of content in the game with this. So it's very just buy it and you have a good melee weapon for everything. So really, really, really good. Next, let's just do the Vanquish Spear. So this is tier 75, gotten from getting 150 quest points. Not augmentable. And yeah, it's just kind of all around. It's free, but it's unaugmentable. I'm just gonna put that in D tier. I would use a lot of these weapons over it. Yeah, let's just slap it there. Next is going to be the Spear of Annihilation and the Masterwork version of it. So the Spear of Annihilation is tier 90, so it's actually pretty good. Oh no. Sorry, my screen just bugged out there. So the Spear of Annihilation, which is a tier 90 spear, works on Corp, does not have halberd range, but is tier 90. I'm gonna slap it up here, Drygors. I'd use it over Drygors probably in some instances. Maybe not. I'll slap at the bottom of A tier. Now the Masterwork version of it is S tier. Reason why it's technically best in slot for switching to bleeds. What it does is it extends the duration of them. So, yeah, that's an S tier, but this is the final look at the tier list. There's a lot of weapons here, but yeah, you can go through them, let me know what you disagree, agree with, something I missed. Yeah,